See. Hello, everybody. Good morning, Morning Cigar, and Adam Worrell, James from Bahia. Nice to see you guys. It is Monday, June 30th, and this is the 125th episode. What was I going to say? Session of Solid Ground Live. And I am Leslie Elliott Boyce. I'm joined by Deborah Knox, Jennifer Friend, Jenny Holland, Aaron Kindsvatter, and Christine Siefen-Wolk. And for once, our names are actually displaying correctly, so you can follow along. Before we get going, Deborah, do you want to start everybody off with an intro to Solid Ground?
Sure. Excuse me. Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice or authoritarian measures such as medical mandates in their workplace, university, children's schools, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join our peer support group for $10 a month, and you can join our forum on locals for $5 a month. To find out more, join our Solid Ground Substack for peer support and our Solid Ground Locals for our forum. Please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thank you, Deborah. Nice to see everybody. Kathleen says, so glad it's back. We've been missing these chats. We missed last week. Thank you all for your patience. I moved across the state, so we relocated to Spokane, Washington, and it just was not coming together for Monday of last week. So thanks everybody for your patience. We have already gotten our first thumbs down, so the haters are here as well. Hello.
Oh, that's nice. Welcome, haters.
Welcome, haters. Yeah. So, Aaron, you have a question that you wanted to bring up.
Yeah. My question is the culture war, well, and we may not all be on the same page. We may not all agree that there's exactly been a culture war. I don't want to assume that we all think that. But for me, we have very much been in a process as a society of something that needed to be won. That there's a culture war that was either going to be lost or won. And I think, and what I'm wondering is, has it been won? Is there a need to continue fighting a culture war, or is that now won? And if there is a continued need for fighting, what is the next sort of battle? What should we who are fighting this war? What should our next battle be? And I don't really have any thoughts about that. That's a genuine question that I would love to hear my esteemed and thoughtful colleagues here respond to.
Yeah. Any thoughts? I know Jenny's
Well,
gonna have
Jenny looked ready
ideas.
to go.
Yeah, I'll go first if everyone wants to keep thinking. But no, it hasn't been won. Yes, it is a war. No, it hasn't been won. In fact, I'm not even sure we're at a tie. I guess it depends on what metric you go by. If you're going by institutions and their role in the culture war, then we are still losing. There are other metrics that bring in more sort of positive evidence, but I would go further. I don't think it's just a culture war. I think it goes as far as a spiritual war. And it's almost like we're at some element of a stalemate, but because we have a large demographic, or at least a very vocal and influential demographic that is entirely set against, well, I don't want to presume everyone here, but it's set against, say, like my values personally, and a lot of people who think like me. And I don't know how we get around that. Obviously, we have to sort of make some sort of peace with that. But on the other hand, I consider that this demographic to be getting more and more extreme, not more and more conciliatory. And I think the election or the primary victory in New York City of Zohran Mandami is a big tell that that demographic is intractable. I'm not entirely sure what to do about that. I mean, I'm happy
I
to
have a,
keep writing very scathing pieces about them, but I don't think it's doing much.
I'd say, I mean, I think as far as normies are concerned, and I don't think normies were ever going along with the woke thing anyway. I think it's maybe clearer to people that there are normies, and there are as many of them as there are. But it does still seem like the elite kind of holding on. I was talking to I have a grad school reunion coming up, and I might do a Braver Angels presentation, and they wanted me to potentially do it next to someone who promotes these racial equity trainings.
Oh,
And the woman who was considering me, doing this panel, she said she went to one of their presentations and they weren't sure if they were going to back off their thinking or double down on it. So there are still people in these activist spaces who are on the fence about relenting or going further. And as Jenny said, I mean, the one, I don't know if it's good or bad, statement, the youth were the ones that really kind of put Zondami over the edge. Now the problem is there's just lots more youth coming and lots of people dying that don't buy this stuff, right? So it's hard to say, well, it's just the kids, and on the other hand, the kids are going to be the adults, and I'm not sure. There's that split between males and females in terms of buying some of this woke stuff, and the guys not being as into it. But I don't know. It's just to me, it's frightening to see whether the Democrats, because of his win in the primary, go back to some of this, like identity politics and all this other stuff, or if they think he's toxic and they back off of it. I feel like we're in a very strange moment with what's going to happen with
the Democrats are having a very, very hard time saying what they are for. Like the people are talking about that there's a war even within the Democratic Party. But nobody has identified a set of policies that would be, more moderate Democratic policies. It's all just anti-Trump. And
so that's the fear. They might jump on this because they're like, "Ooh, look at all the energy. Let's do what he said."
Well, I mean, they do have policies. Their policies are abortion free and on demand with no time limits, right up to the 9th month. Butt plug education in middle school. They have, going by New York anyway, free buses, free childcare. Who's going to pay for? Like, there's no such thing as free, so who's going to pay for it? And higher property taxes for white people. So, yeah, I mean, that's their platform. I mean, I think that is that is what the Democratic base now is, and that's the interesting thing that we're going to see play out. Is given that the Democrats have obviously decided, like either de facto or just by letting it happen, that they're abandoning their blue collar voter completely. Their blue collar voter has abandoned them in kind by going for Trump. And at this point, it's going to be a numbers game because, like, who's going to have the higher number in New York? And everyone's saying it's going to be Mandami. But, I mean, the Democrats do have a platform. It's just that it only appeals to a very specific demographic. And that I consider that demographic to be quite extremist at this point.
Well, it's interesting, Jenny. Am I correct in my thinking? Do you think that most people aren't actually in favor of the things that you've outlined? Do you think there are enough people who are just kind of like anti-Trump so that those kinds of ideas could find their way into the mainstream just because people are so opposed to Trump that they would go along with almost anything? Or do you think that those are just like extreme positions that for one reason or another are just that most people just haven't been aware? The question I have is, now that there is more awareness of these kinds of things, is the system going to take care of this extremism on its own, or does it need people out there saying, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong?
Well, the system is already not taking care of it, and that's how it's gotten this far. I read the numbers. That's a really good question, and I don't know. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think they'll be kept in check? I mean, is Trump derangement so serious that people are going to look at his more extreme stances and say, "Well, actually, I'd rather go with that"? Do you think so, Deborah? You're in New York. You're the one who should tell
I
us
look at
that.
I look at my family. I mean, they don't know about the issues we're concerned about. It doesn't touch their lives. They see Trump. They're convinced he's fascist. They're convinced he's going to like do a coup with Pete Hegseth, whatever, right? So they'll minimize anything that we might talk about that's concerning, or not sit and contemplate the ripple effects of all of that in society because of this Trump bad, scary, whatever. Like they just can't quite do it. Now, maybe if it came into their lives, like, I don't know, if my mother went somewhere and there was like a man in, like, in the changing room, like maybe, I don't know. Or you look at places like, even, I don't know if you saw Informed Dissent this week, but like there's just, this is New York City, and the thing, New York City is more crazy than other places. So you have these school districts that are still not allowing, like, you know, like Lisa Selin Davis or Maud Marion can barely talk, you know, like they can, right? But it's like in these blue enclaves, I think it's crazier. So maybe the question is it getting better in non-blue enclaves? Is there something shifting there? And if the blue enclaves don't shift, do they just all go to hell and everything else is better? Like there is, I will say one thing about Mandami. I was listening to commentary this morning. They did say, if he wins, then maybe New York's governor will go to a Republican, and maybe the House of Representatives will go to Republicans, because people go, that was so bad, we don't want that. And then that would tip things on the state level and federally. So
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's interesting. That's interesting. But interestingly, Mandami got like in some neighborhoods anyway, but like he did not win the African American vote, which for a New York Democrat is wild. That to me is the most significant part of this. If you look at, and the New York Times had a really good map, neighborhood by neighborhood, of who won what, and I mean it's all the hipster and professional managerial class neighborhoods that went for him, and then you have all, like, which is like the sliver of southern Brooklyn along the water, a little bit around the park,
Bushwick,
and then
Bed-Stuy.
Bushwick, yeah, and then like Williamsburg, Greenpoint, that kind of thing, and then all of the rest of it is like they took a hard pass. So I mean, there is going to be a general election. I know everyone's written it off, like it's a done deal, but I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot of bus drivers and a lot of cops and a lot of regular people that live in New York City that no one ever remembers, because you know the cultural sector is so dominant and so vocal. But I don't necessarily think it is a done deal, but maybe I'm being Pollyannish, because it's so interesting to me that a New York City Democrat primary winner won without the political support of Black New Yorkers.
Jennifer, Christine, do you have any thoughts on this?
I guess I would just say, it came up in the chats. I read the chats too while we're on here, and the idea that it's still we're still having massive problems with education. I tend to focus a lot on what's going on with the schools, because I was an educator, and that's where my primary kind of interest lies. In the middle of all of this is what's happening to these students that are being educated. And I guess the Supreme Court just made the decision that you're allowed to opt your kids out of LGBTQ training at the K-12 level. I think that's a start, but I think that we're still really far away from the educate, especially at the university level. They're going strong. They're still very captured. They're still very indoctrinated, and they're doubling down, I think, in many situations. It was a relief to see that Supreme Court decision, but I don't know how that's really going to be enforced. I don't know if it's going to be enforceable everywhere. These blue enclaves, for example, I don't know that that's going to be enforceable there. I know that in California, if we don't like a federal law, we throw it away. That's just kind of how California runs if it's opposing the blue agenda. So it's a good start, but we're nowhere near close to being done. And the universities, it's so overwhelming. It wasn't enough to just withdraw funding from Harvard. We're talking about a deeper level beyond Ivy League, beyond, any of those other institutions, the small liberal arts schools. All of those are problematic. So I don't have an answer to the how. I just have a fear that we're so over the cliff in that way, it's going to take a couple of decades for us to try to straighten that out. That's scary to me, because in the meantime, those students are going to become adults, and adults who make decisions on policy and everything else that we're talking about.
Like Ketanji
Yeah.
Brown Jackson's
Yes.
decision. I was really
Yes.
shocked by that. Yeah, I was
Yes.
really shocked by that.
I was too.
Will you say a little bit about that, Aaron?
Well, it appears, based on my reading of this, that Ketanji Brown Jackson, in writing a dissent from the Supreme Court's decision, has. Well, I guess I want to own that I'm not an expert on this area, but that she acted as I've seen many of the woke people on campuses act, where they just say, "Yeah, free speech, but we have better ideas, so we're not going to pay attention to that." I mean, that's not what the substance of her claim was, but that's what her dissent was in process. It was very woke in that it just asserted a kind of moral superiority that ignored the precedent of the law and the principles of the Constitution. I think that's a fair assessment of the criticism that was written by Amy Coney Barrett of her of this dissent. And it was striking the level of contempt that the other justices saw in their response to her dissent. So that was very scary, because a lot of times you think of someone who makes it to the Supreme Court and you think, yeah, but there's like hidden competence there. And in this case, it was sort of like, boy, she just, as a tenured for life professional, I guess she doesn't have to worry about her reputation as much. But in this dissent, it just showed such a lack of
Rigor?
just well, no, self
Seriousness.
reflection, I guess, self understanding. It's such a blind devotion to sort of ideology, and I get to say what is right because I understand what's right. It's like the kind of thinking that you see on campus, where it's just kind of like, oh, I understand, so what I say is right, and but just no self. What's the term that I'm looking for? No self understanding, no ability to stand outside of one's ideology and determine, is that a good idea or is that not, based on a set of principles. Like, it displayed none of that. And so I do think what you're saying, what folks are saying here about, there's what Christine is saying about, there's a generation of unadults that are going to be making decisions that are unprincipled decisions. They're based on an adolescent desire and belief in utopia, and that's very scary.
You're reminding me of Ilya Shapiro's book. I read just a bit of it, Lawless, because he looked at what's happened to law school training. And so many of these people that are going through law school, where they are sort of abandoning like basic legal principles, jurisprudence, and all of that, that is frightening.
Yeah, that's terrifying stuff, because what that's what really scared me about the universities. At first it was just annoying, and then it got frightening, when you saw these people have no intention of
Yeah.
even nodding their heads at the law, because they're in sort of like a, well, you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs kind of way of thinking. And when they say, like, they want to dismantle society and create society, something better, like, they mean it. And they don't know what better is. They just mean that they're not going to follow any of what society has built in the meantime. So it's very chaotic, very not self-aware, uh, very little reflection on the potential trade-offs and I guess that's what at the base is, that all of these things have trade-offs, that there are maybe some good things that would happen as a result of them, and then there would be some consequences. And I think what Ketanji Brown Jackson, her dissent seemed to have no appreciation for the trade-offs of what she was suggesting. She just wanted to pretty much say, like, I as a judge want to be in charge and be able to tell people what to do, because and that would and that and it's because I know better. I'm more moral. I have a deeper understanding. I have critical consciousness or whatever. And I the last time I saw like that kind of lack of self-awareness was on university campuses. And I would see that regularly from people with PhDs, and that used to shock me, because I thought that the people with the PhDs were the adults in the room that were going to keep the guardrails up. But you know,
Mhm.
towards the time that I left higher education, there was virtually no distinction between, sort of the students, and the people with the PhDs. Uh, they were all operating from this sort of moralistic adolescent space, and to see that in a Supreme Court justice, uh, it makes me think about Christine's point, and I'm thinking, oh man, yeah, boy, that is going to be a scary couple of decades, because I think I agree with Christine's time frame, um, that it's going to take a while for this corrective action to come through. So I don't know.
Yeah,
That's a
I think that's
frightening
the
thought.
biggest prob. I think that's the biggest problem, and that's why the culture war is not over, because there is still the ideological capture of the educational institutions, K through 12, and the universities, and graduate schools are still churning out therapists that are told that we should be aiming to indoctrinate our clients into a
Hmm.
particular ideology as opposed to just providing therapy.
Hmm.
And until this is out of the institutions, it will continue to spread throughout society. I think that's really the main target is the educational institutions.
Hmm.
That's
And
how
I
this
think too
really
the
spread in the beginning. That's how this really started is um, the long march through the institutions, getting this stuff into education and reshaping how people think.
Deborah, go
I was
ahead.
just going to say, I think too, the frame, even people fighting this, sometimes the frame they're forced to operate in, like I was really, there's these ethnic studies curricula in certain states that are required. I know California, I think Utah, I forget which other ones, and FAIR came up with a new curriculum that would meet the standards, but is, bringing much more things into about real critical thinking, logical fallacy. There's a whole bunch of great stuff in there, but they had to
Yeah.
open it with a section on identity. Like the whole first 8 lessons are on identity. And now they try to widen what identity even means, so it's not simply immutable characteristics. So I think that's the way they're trying to get around this. But they still, to even be considered, they have to have this like identity thing and front the whole curriculum with it, right? So it's like it's so hard to like to even break around some of these things and offer something new. And like, I think it's smart that they are working in the system and trying to, like, I don't even want to say smuggle, just bring in some really good things for these kids to be learning while still kind of having to do the thing they said, but even breaking that a little bit. But there's a lot of these things, it's hard to even break the given frame, at all. I got into it with the woman that I was talking to about doing this panel, because I said something about, she said, well, they all just want power. And I'm like, well, there's also, sometimes people are fighting DEI because of merit. And then she, went into, I mean, it was almost like, oh, that's one of those Western
Right.
things, and it wasn't quite like that. But I was like, wow, like there's just these givens that are widely spread amongst the elite that it's really hard to like talk around and say, I'm not playing in that worldview.
Yeah. Yeah. I shared the FAIR curriculum on this listserv that I'm a part of, and immediately, for people who are interested in helping all children look at this equity site, and for people who understand the influence of white supremacy, go check this out. And it's just, yeah. One of the things, coming back to the New York issue, one of the things that I think has led to this is that I think people have, I think they've, I think they're they're too protected from the consequences of their decisions. And so, with the people in New York, for example, who think they want to have this, I don't know the difference between communism and socialism, but it sounds like a communist person come in and be the mayor who wants to like defund the police. I'm not sure that wouldn't be a good idea. Like, it would be tragic,
Yeah.
but the people who live there would then no longer enjoy protection from the consequences of their decisions. Like, if there is no adult to save them from the decisions that they made at the ballot box, and maybe that's a good thing. That's
Yeah.
happening in Burlington, Vermont right now. Like, Burlington, Vermont went from this idyllic, lovely city in the green, pristine hills to a drug-infested sewer with needles all over the street, and no one could walk in the downtown marketplace anymore because there's just uh, drug addicts and homeless people flock there because of its permissive policies. And so it ruined the city in the span of about, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And so, I think the people of Burlington have not yet learned their lesson, but they're on their way. And so maybe the same thing will happen in New York. But that's an awful lot of sort of, I don't know, destruction or that has to
Yeah.
happen in order for that to be learned.
I thinking about like the culture war or the spiritual war or whatever it is, whatever underlies these kinds of patterns that we're discussing and observing. I've been trying to figure out what simply is it? What are the simple sort of forces that are underlying this, And there's this thing in progressivism that says what is now is not good and needs to be perfected or fixed in some way. And there's truth in that. There's always truth in that what is could be better in some ways. And then what it is in sort of conservatism is, well, what is now is pretty predictable and understandable, and there's good things about it. So we should be really careful with the things that we tinker with. And I'm kind of thinking of the concept of Chesterton's fence. When you talk about Burlington, Vermont being kind of this idyllic place that falls hard. I thought about that a lot living in Seattle. There was this, I lived there for around a decade. I moved there in 2009 and I left in 2019 ish. And in just the time that I lived there, I saw a lot of degradation. And it was so many things. It was like little things like just cultural change. When I got there, it was this funky place where everybody was weird and kind of artsy. And that was kind of my first impression. And by the time I left, it was like everybody wears athleisure and holds to-go coffees and wears hunter boots. And, you know, it was like this really posh sort of thing. But the tech explosion brought a lot of wealthy people. And so you saw just the athleisure set came out, and that's what it was. But also the little old buildings in the downtowns were leveled, and high rises were put in that had no character and were just these boxes and now your grocery store, which used to be this funky cool place, was slick and sleek and interesting. And then there were Sharps boxes everywhere and places where the homeless would be. And safe supply laws came in, and methadone clinics were there, and these kinds of things that I don't know if it's like this zeal for change's sake, but when you see the pride marches and all the sex marches, the naked people just protesting for the sake of protesting, like, what are you tearing down? What do you think you're tearing down? And when you said butt plug education, I didn't laugh at that because I know that you're talking about something that is true. And I have children in that age group. My children are there. I would love to send my kids to public school. That would be a dream to me, to be able to trust my community school with my children so that I could focus on work and so that I wouldn't worry that I wasn't giving them all the social connection and all of the education about how to be a person in the community. Like, I'm responsible for all of that. I have to figure out how to connect them to everything and teach them everything. And that's crazy. I would love to just send my kids off into the community in that way. And I can't because of freaking butt plug education. Right? It's
I'm
not
trademark
know
on
why
that.
Yeah,
I don't
trademark.
really
I
understand
like
why
the
that
heavy
requires education. It's not that complicated.
Right. But
I don't
Yeah,
know. I
yeah,
had a bad experience. I could have used some education around that.
oh, Aaron.
I can
It's
help
funny
you
Or
you're
with
maybe
talking
a
about
maybe a warning label.
Well, I think about this. I think about Marxism. Somebody said Marxism. I think it was Morning Cigars. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Somebody said, and I thought, well, there is this way in which the protest crowd, and it's not like I've never protested. I protested vaccine mandates like crazy, but there's this way in which there's a protest against change and there's a protest for change. It's not that simple, though. It's not that simple. There's something else there, but there is this way in which there's one set
Well, a
of
clear
society
objective.
that wants to control the way that you think. They're not content to have you just live your life. They want you to think
Right.
the way that they think. And that
And
is
so there's
communism.
no clear objective. There's no clear objective with the latter. Like you're
Well,
talking
maybe.
about protesting vaccine mandate, and you were essentially saying, stop the mandate.
Well,
right?
but the trans
you
people,
had an objective there.
I was talking with someone recently who was going to a trans healthcare protest in Seattle, and they're protesting the removal of trans healthcare from young people, and this meant something to this individual. This was, and I disagree, but I respect this person, and I don't like that stance, but I respect the person, and I'm not trying to say bad things about them. But that has an objective. They had an objective. And so it's not that simple, I think. There's something there, but there's this control of the way that you think. And it's not a just let us be us, because it's let us be us and let us tell you that you also have to be us. So I'm still struggling to articulate this. Jenny, I know you were trying to break in.
Well, I was going to say something similar about New York and like how it used to be. I think New York was an example of a very successful polyglot multicultural city, and a very successful example of what immigration can do. And it was a city of strivers. People come to work, blah 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 blah. And it's shocking and very upsetting, actually, to me, to think that New York that I lived in for a very long time is going to fall under the sway of a gay race communist, because that's not going to fix what needs to be fixed primarily, but also that thing that you're talking about, that need to control not just the levers of power, but to control the perceived perception, like what they perceive your perception to be, which is intolerable and against all things that are good. Is something that brings me to think about something I wanted to say at the beginning, which was the changes in the education system, the takeover of the education that Jennifer and Christine were mentioning before, dovetailed and probably mutually influenced by changes in parenting and how we raise children. And all of us are of an age that, even though we grew up in a very liberal world, with liberal families to a greater or lesser degree, we were living off the fumes of the old ways that people raised children, where we were instilled with basic competence, basic sense of responsibility, and a sense that we had to prove ourselves in school and not the other way around. And then someone I think it was Caravaggio in the comments, said that universities become kindergartens. But that's an outgrowth of that parenting model, which is, you can do no wrong, change the road to suit the child, not prepare the child to walk the road. And that is this monstrous, narcissism is such an overused word, but it's not quite good enough. It's not quite bad enough, I should say, to capture this very toxic type of person. And there's many of them, and that really feels like they are entitled to your respect and your fealty and your agreement, without them being competent in any way. And that's the other thing that's been lost in this, which we've already mentioned, is the competency that you were talking about with the Supreme Court justice.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have a crisis of competency that I sometimes worry, in my more negative moments, are like, our plane's going to start falling out of the sky, because yet we don't allow children to experience enough stress to be able to deal with the hard exams and engineering that you need to do in order to prove yourself to be competent to build and design and fly a plane and keep us all alive. Okay, we live in a culture which is like, children are too sensitive to execute basic tasks and have any stress put on them whatsoever, whilst also getting the butt plug education, by the way, which is as if that's going to help. But like, this is all a perfect storm. And the people who feel entitled to our respect and demand that we perceive them in a certain way are also the people that have ruined these great cities. New York is, by the way, and I've heard this about Burlington a lot, and I believe you, but New York is the capital of global finance. It's no joke if a communist takes over.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, like, I don't know how that's going to work. I don't know how that's going to work. This is the center of capital markets, okay, in the world. And so these young people, and there not even that young. They're not that young. There's plenty of boomers like this. There's plenty of Gen X like this. Boomers and Gen X allowed this to happen. I'm going to give the millennials and the Gen Z a pass on this one. They are pie in the sky. They've never had to make a hard decision in their lives, because they grew up, again, on the fumes of the old ways, which produced order and consistency and standards. And they decided, because their feelings got hurt along the way by the order and the consistency and the standards, and they weren't allowed to sleep with whoever they want, or someone made them feel bad in school because they failed, or blah blah blah, that they were going to do away with all of that. They're idealistic, utopian psychopaths. So they're going to take all of the things that made society good for them and literally destroy them. And that's what we've been seeing in slow motion. And actually, if anything, it's not slowing down, it's speeding up, and it's coming to a head.
I have two comments. One on Justice Jackson, which was interesting. There was on Megyn Kelly, she had people talking about those decisions. And one guy is someone who knew her, Justice Jackson, from law school, from debate club. I mean, he maybe went to her high school.
Yeah,
I forget. But let's just put it. So I wonder, because he said she was really brilliant. So I don't know
I
if
remember
she's
that.
dumbing down and just because it's hip, or I don't know if she's actually really believes the things she's saying, or if she's kind of dumbing herself down to be this activist person now, but she actually might be smarter than she's acting. I don't know.
Well,
I don't like the results. I don't like the
either
results
of those is terrifying.
I know,
Yeah.
right?
know,
Either are bad.
yeah.
On the education thing, just having done like helping kids with go to college, SATs, all of this, and I do think the parenting is bad. I have to say that, but I do wonder if some of it, I look at things swinging one way and the other. I used to watch kids under so much pressure to get into like these top schools. They weren't sleeping. They're doing 20 extracurriculars. I think it's partly because once we said everyone should go to college, or just about everybody, numbers of seats in colleges didn't increase that much. And so then it's like way more competitive to get anywhere. And then you have jobs saying you need this degree. And now it's not you just need this degree, you're gonna actually need the master's degree. And so then I think it went like too far. It was like there was so much pressure on these people, and then it was like this swing the other way. Well, we shouldn't be so hard on them, it shouldn't matter. So I think a little bit of it is a period of potentially like excessive pressure and people feeling like they had no chance, but then it going so far with the helicopter parenting. And so I think it's like a both and with that, and probably a lot of it is the not good parenting. But I see this phase where there was actually an immense amount of pressure on these young people, maybe in the 90s, early 2000s, and then that just got like swung the other way. And I do want to say the other thing about these, like they were calling them barista leftists or whatever. I don't know what to offer them. Say they went and got a dumb college degree and no topic that's useful for anything. Say they have all this debt, right? Because people were like, go to college. I'm wondering what can say someone on the right. I want to see that, like, say, here's a way you can get yourself out of your circumstance. Like, here's something you're going to, I keep thinking, like, can companies hire people and say, if you work all this and you work really hard, we'll help you with your debt? Or I don't know. I do feel like those people need some way to think they can get out of this bad situation they got themselves into. And we could maybe blame them for making the decision.
Yeah, there are
but
a lot
I don't know
of
what
people in that
do for them.
situation.
Yeah.
No, you're right. There's a lot of people in that situation. There's people that have enormous student loan debt, and it is going to drastically change the course of their lives. It's going to change when they are able to purchase their first home and get on the property ladder. It'll change if they're able to marry or not. Some people do not want to marry other people that are carrying student loan debt. So it's an incredibly serious problem, and it used to be in the 70s you could work a summer and that would pay, if you worked full time, you could pay your way through college by working summers. That is absolutely not even remotely possible for people now. Education has become really more and more inaccessible, and people are kind of mortgaging their futures to get the education, and sometimes it doesn't work out well for them.
Yeah. And it's going to keep working out worse with AI, which is about to take away all white collar entry level jobs. So I hear. I mean, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. And you can't, you shouldn't be surprised that these young people's answer to this is communism. It is literally communism because, I mean, I can actually see it from their perspective. And also when I was young, I remember what being young is like. You're very fervent. You're very dumb. I mean, I'm saying that I was this person. Okay. I'm not throwing accusations around. Like you think there's something like you're angry in a way because you don't have the tools that you have the body and the mind of an adult supposedly, but you don't have the confidence and you don't have the competency and you don't have the skills to fully to make yourself feel safe by be able to provide for yourself. That's a process, and it's very painful, and it's very much trial and error, and it involves a ton of rejection. And that's for someone like me who was quite resilient emotionally, and had been presented with lots of challenges beforehand. So I was able to muddle my way through, and I quickly dumped communism. But kids nowadays are already radicalized from kindergarten anyway. So I mean, they don't have the resilience. They just don't. I mean, that's well known. Like, isn't that a very studied fact? Like, their emotional regulation and their mental health and their resilience is at all-time lows. Of course, they're going to go for this crazy idea of communism, which, by the way, they know nothing about. They just say, oh, I get free stuff and I get to keep on watching porn and jacking off whenever the hell I want to. And like, that sounds like a good life when you're 19 or 20. I mean, it does. Like, I don't blame them.
You know, I want to, you know, Bill
Ackman.
Ackman's been tweeting about all this
Yeah.
stuff and trying to get someone to run in the race. And I saw, what is that show, Dad Saves, whatever. There's a podcast with the guy who's a dad who's like
Saves
center
America.
right.
Yeah.
Dad Save America.
Yeah.
And he had on a guest recently. I'd seen the guy on Glenn Lowry before, who's in his 20s, who's from Venezuela, who saw what happened to Venezuela and describes it to Dad Saves America. And I feel like we need a counter TikTok viral video thing of a young person who's well-spoken and kind of fun explaining, like, this is what's going to happen to your grocery store, or this is going to, you know, I was kind of like, let's find that young guy, whatever his name is, and let's get to Bill Ackman and get some money and have a counter videos or something like that. Sorry, I interrupted you, Leslie.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's, yeah, influencers, the influence war. Interesting. Student loan debt was something people were talking about here. Jennifer brought it up, and I read about this a while back. I was really curious. What was the history of how we got where we are with student loan debt? It is the Economist I was reading, and I don't remember the article. They were talking about this as it's really the most toxic form of debt that a person can carry, because it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy like other forms of debt, like medical debt or other things that are really serious for people. There is a way to pay a burden, pay a toll, a heavy toll. Bankruptcy is not easy on a person, but to alleviate that burden if it becomes so heavy and so toxic that you can't get out from under it. And the reason that it's not dischargeable in bankruptcy is that it used to be taxpayer backed. It's no longer. It's now private. So, but this was grandfathered in when so now it's just this cash cow. And universities are an interesting form of social engineering. One of the reasons for degree inflation and for the requirement that everybody go to an extended amount of school before they can enter the workforce and become a private citizen, really, an independent private citizen, is to put off family births. It's to help. The more educated women are, the fewer children they have. And so this is a social engineering project in order to reduce family size and reduce childbearing. And it also, you see that inflation that starts to happen. Not only does do your college credits cost more than they used to cost by an exponential amount, but also the amount of credits that you need in order to get your basic degree inflates. And then the fact that many careers now you can't even enter them with a bachelor's degree, you have to have an advanced degree. So it's a really toxic soup, and the bankers are laughing. You know, they're just counting their cash.
Leslie, don't forget the interest rates. The interest rates are dictated. This was my experience anyway, like a decade ago. But correct me if it's changed. The interest rates are set. There's no shopping around for like what best loan interest rate you can have. And this is when, I mean, mortgage interest rates were, I don't know how much they were. I mean, they were 7% and 8% on student loans for graduate school. Like, that's not acceptable. That would make me hate capitalism too. That's insane.
And you sell them to young people who don't really have a sense of what this means yet, because it's all monopoly money to them. It sounds like it's crazy. It's like, that's so much money, but I don't know what money is. And you're telling me that I can expect to make $60,000 a year when I come out with this degree. So I should be able to do that. And then, it just explodes, and you're looking at debt that you're going to carry to the grave.
They're also not underwritten. I was listening to the All In podcast, and Freeberg was talking about, this is the only debt you get that there's no underwriting. No one assesses your risk. So he actually said it'd be better if it went to the private market, not the government, but the private market said, okay, what degree are you going to get? What are your grades already? What job are you going to get? Okay, for you, I'll give you, and what's the school you're going to? Do they even graduate people, right? And like for you, okay, you get this percent, I'll give you this much. And I don't know, the prices might end up be a little higher, but I think we'd have way fewer people taking on as much debt as they do currently.
Yeah.
Well, and another thing, if you want to look at what a racket education is, just look at the cost of textbooks and how often they change editions. So I know Aaron and Christine, you're probably familiar with this from working in education, but professors are required to use the latest edition. And oftentimes when they change, or maybe sometimes they're allowed to use the last year's edition. Sometimes they're really nice and they'll tell their students, if you have an old edition, the only difference in this book is what page they put this information on. They just changed the photos around a little bit and they reorganized the info. All the information is still there. So I'll, sort of sneak in the page numbers if you're using edition 7 instead of edition 8 like everybody else.
Right.
But you're talking about $150 for a stupid textbook. And there's no reason they need to be that expensive. It's a parasitic enterprise.
Yeah. Exactly. And these are kids who are coming through an education system that has been telling everyone since the 80s that everyone can be president and everyone can be a star and
That's
everyone can be
right.
this, that, and the other. And their parents are too scared to say, you know what, actually, maybe we should dial down on the expectations because, it's not looking likely. And maybe you should consider other options and all that stuff. They don't do that. So they're these young people from millennials on, actually really even our age, have just been fed one lie after another. I mean, I think the student loan debt thing and the college cartel scam is the economic version of the trans thing. It's not the kids' fault because all the adults, all the professional bodies, all the teachers, all the culture, all the cultural programming is saying you have to go to college. It's going to be so much fun, and then you're going to have a hotshot job. And we all remember the business Barbie. Do you remember the corporate Barbie with her little briefcase? And we all fell for it. And then we're like, okay, well, maybe our kids will do this too. And, it's just snowballed into an economic disaster and also a political one because they're all now indoctrinated.
I just want to comment because it came up in the chat, Leslie, and you posted it. That's an important piece. It was Justin, somebody or other in the chat who had said it, is that the books that are getting reprinted nowadays are getting reprinted with critical theory added to them. So it's not just the page numbers change. And I experienced this myself from needing to look up the most latest editions for the classes that I taught. And almost every single one of them had critical theory, diversity, quote unquote, but critical theory injected. So it's not just the cost. So now you're looking at the cost. You're looking at the fact that the books actually are changing to include all of this critical theory that we're, trying to get rid of, that then the students learn. Even if it's not part of the lecture, it's part of the reading material. So it is getting in there in a more formalized fashion through the textbooks.
Another place where you talk about the culture war, it doesn't appear to be changing that quickly yet, is I look at sort of the art scene, or museums are still having all these very woke blurbs on the wall. I was going to go to some open studios this weekend, and the whole theme of all the art things was on climate change. I was going to go to this other art thing in a week or so, and almost all the themes are on resistance. Every piece of art has to be about resistance. And I'm just kind of when can we just have something not related to politics?
It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Olivia in the chat says, stop using trans as a scapegoat. And Olivia, I enjoy your contributions to the chat and having you there. And I also, maybe this is a topic that extends past the current one, but it's relevant through culture war. But, this medical concept that basically what trans is it's a bunch of people who feel like they want to change themselves, and the technology exists now, so they should be able to access that, and there should be no barriers to accessing that kind of medical technology if it exists and I want it, I should have it, right? And so how do we make sense of that? That's part of this. If now it's here and we've all been told it's here, look at me, I've used this technology and I'm happier with my life and with myself. Well, what about me too? Me too. I need to use that too. And you should not stop me. This is health care. It falls under the same umbrella of everything else that you access at the doctor. So why not allow me to access it if I want it? then it's a slippery slope from Botox to a facelift to a boob job all the way down to a phalloplasty, or estrogen for, I don't know, menopause through estrogen for gender change. So, these things exist. I want it. I should have it. Let me pay my money or use my insurance and access these services. Just curious what y'all's thoughts are about that frame.
I think there's, I don't know if this is like what you're aiming for, but I think there's like a big difference between adults accessing that, which I still have some issue with because those medical interventions are flawed and people have had very severe health repercussions from them. But I do think there's a major difference between adults accessing that versus children.
Well, there's also the question, like this study that just came out, that was a comprehensive review of cross-sex hormones for male people who have been taking estrogen. And it showed these horrendous side effects. I mean, just horrendous.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's very troubling how
Yeah.
much, I'll just read a couple things right now since we're on it. I have a screenshot of this thing. But yeah, it's let's see, 5 times the risk of blood clots increase, 10 times risk of stroke,
Wow.
26 times the risk of testicular cancer, 80 times higher overall death rate, 40 times higher breast cancer, brain
Wow.
damage, and more susceptibility to autoimmune illness. So
Yeah, I mean, it makes you question if it's ethical medically to be providing these interventions given the risk factors associated with it. And, that's why why I said, even for adults, I have
yeah.
big hesitations about if we should be doing that, but definitely not for kids as far as I'm concerned.
And the pro-trans healthcare side will say it's if I have informed consent and I'm aware of those risks, I should be allowed to take those risks and pay for this procedure or this medication.
Which goes back into the question that we've brought up before. Is consent what defines something being ethical? And there was that article, I think Rod Dreher wrote it years ago, about a gentleman who had hired somebody else on the internet to, I
Eat
think,
him.
kill him and eat him, and there was some sexual component to it. And
Mhm.
people were saying, well, he consented, and so, well, does that make it moral and ethical? And I would say I would come down on the side of consent is not the same thing as making something ethical or moral. I think consent's obviously important, but I think it's the floor, not the ceiling.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of its own ball of wax. But
Yeah.
Aaron, just to round us off at the end of the hour, how do you think that we answered your question, and how is your framework working on that question now?
Well, my framework is that probably I do think that there's still a culture war. I think the points that were made were very cogent, and I think that a shift for people who think like me, that needs to happen is that we need to shift from perhaps criticizing the premises of the culture war over and over, because they seem to be pretty immune from these criticisms because they don't live in the realm of reality, is that we probably need to shift our focus to creating new institutions. And that's a huge, huge, huge undertaking. But it probably needs to happen in a very small way. I did that within counseling, in that I stopped supporting the American Counseling Association and joined the American Mental Health Counselors Association, which is not woke. And I join organizations like OTI, Open Therapy
Mm-hmm.
Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I'm voting with my feet. That's a very small thing that's happened, but we need more sort of, not just, I think, non-woke universities, but maybe we need some anti-woke universities. Maybe the fixing of all of this is not, it's not going to be liberal,
Right.
because
Yes.
we need to say no. We need to
Yeah.
not be so permissive.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah, sorry, can I just say we can't liberalism really did get us here, and we're going to have to think of an alternative to fight back that isn't authoritarianism. I have no idea what that is, but I agree with you,
I
Aaron.
don't
It's not
either.
enough to be you have to be anti-woke. Sorry, it's not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Yeah,
Can we talk about this another time? Because I don't necessarily agree with that. And like UATX is taking this very strong anti-woke, like I think too extreme stance. So anyway,
Yeah,
that
let's
might be a
talk about
topic
that.
for another
That'd be
time.
great. Let's do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. And thank you all for joining me in this conversation. And Jenny, I think you're going to be gone for a couple weeks.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so we'll be missing Jenny, but keep an eye on her Substack. I hope she's writing in the meantime, and we'll see her back
I will be.
in a few weeks. And everybody else, will see you guys next Monday. Have a wonderful week,
Thanks,
all.
everybody.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Your vacation, Jenny. I hope it's good.
Thank you.